Hello students, I'm Dr. Rohan Khandelwal. I'm a breast cancer surgeon and a surgery faculty with Marrow. In this video, I'll be covering some important questions for the FMG exam. I'll be discussing each question in detail. So in all, we'll be covering around 40 to 50 important points which can be asked as potential questions in your FMG exam. So I would please request that you make a note of these points and revise them a few days before your exams as well. Some of these questions which I'm showing have been asked in the previous FMG exams as well. So the first question is that which cancer can develop in long-standing venous ulcers? You know that venous ulcers can be seen in patients with varicose veins. And the options are basal cell carcinoma, malignant melanoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and angiosarcoma. So the correct answer here is squamous cell carcinoma. And you know such an ulcer which develops in long-standing venous ulcers is known as a Marjolin's ulcer. So long-standing venous ulcers and burn scars can undergo malignant change, and the name Marjolin's ulcer has been asked multiple times in the exam. So please remember this. This Marjolin's ulcer is usually a squamous cell carcinoma. And how do we identify a squamous cell carcinoma? It is going to have raised everted margins. The image of Marjolin's ulcer was asked in the last year's FMG exam, so you should know the image as well. It will be in the region of a scar. There are usually 1 to 2 questions from skin cancer, so I'll just briefly tell you about skin cancers as well. The other one which has been asked in your exam is basal cell carcinoma. This is also known as a rodent ulcer, very important, known as a rodent ulcer, and it has pearly white margin, right? It has rolled out pearly white margin. So squamous had raised everted cauliflower like margin. Basal cell carcinoma has rolled out pearly white edges. And the important thing is, why do we call it a rodent ulcer? Because it burrows locally, it invades locally, right? But lymphatic and distant spread is uncommon. So this point has also been asked in the exam. Another point which has been asked, the most common site for basal cell carcinoma is the face, above the line joining the angle of the mouth to the ear lobule. That above this line is the most common site where basal cell carcinoma can occur. Malignant melanoma, there are certain one-liners which have been asked. You should remember these 4 one-liners which have been asked in the exam. The most common type is superficial spreading type. The best prognosis is of lentigo maligna. Lentigo maligna is type of an in situ melanoma. It does not invade. Worst prognosis is of nodular melanoma, and the most common melanoma in dark-skinned patients, this has also been asked in your exam, is acral melanoma. So remember these 4 points in a melanoma. Another point which has been asked, what are the changes which can be seen in a pre-existing mole, which will tell me that that mole is getting converted into a malignant lesion. So you can remember this as A, B, C, D, E. This has been asked. A is for asymmetry, B is for irregular borders, C is for change in color, D is an increase in diameter of the lesion if it becomes more than 6 millimeters. And E is if it is evolving, change in size, shape, color. So if you notice ABCDE changes in any pre-existing mole, then that can be a pointer that it is getting converted into a malignancy. So this is regarding the first question. The next question which we have to discuss is, which one of the following is not an indication for laparotomy? You know, laparotomy is opening up the abdomen in a patient with penetrating abdominal trauma. Now the key word which we have to remember here is penetrating. You know, there can be 2 types of abdominal traumas commonly, blunt and penetrating. They are talking about penetrating trauma. So the options are presence of rebound tenderness, bile leakage, wound superficial to peritoneum, and tag of omentum hanging out. Correct answer here is wound superficial to the peritoneum. We don't do a laparotomy immediately in these patients. Look, presence of rebound tenderness. You know, rebound tenderness is a sign of peritonitis. So if there is peritonitis, we definitely have to operate the patient. Bile leakage means that either the bowel has been injured or there's been some other biliary tree injury. You have to explore the patient. And omentum hanging out means the peritoneum has been breached. Only if the peritoneum has been breached, then only the omentum is going to come out. So if that happens, you have to explore the patient. So please remember, if you have a penetrating abdominal wound, just remember any wound superficial to the peritoneum, above the peritoneum, you can just suture the wound and send the patient for a CT for further evaluation. You know, CCT is contrast-enhanced CT scan. But if there is a peritoneal breach, that means the peritoneum has been breached. Okay, in that case, we have to do a laparotomy, especially if there's peritonitis, if the omentum is hanging out, or if there is bile staining of the dressing. The next question is a straightforward question asked multiple times. The most common organ injured in penetrating abdominal trauma. So the correct answer here is liver. And you should remember these one-liners. These one-liners have been frequently asked in the exam. So another question is, which is the most common organ injured in seatbelt syndrome? This has also been asked. In seatbelt syndrome, the answer is mesentery of the bowel. So please remember these one-liners. They've been asked quite frequently in the exam. The most common organ injured in blunt abdominal trauma is spleen. Penetrating has changed, and please remember this. Penetrating liver is more common than small intestine. GSW is gunshot wound. Gunshot wound to the abdomen. The most common organ injured is the small intestine. Seatbelt syndrome has also been asked. Seatbelt syndrome can occur if you're wearing a seatbelt and suddenly you apply the brakes. So you will move forward. The seatbelt will push you back. So the organs get compressed between the seatbelt and the vertebra. That is seatbelt syndrome. It is again the mesentery of the bowel. Deceleration injury is the DJ flexure, that is duodenojejunal flexure. And overall, the most common organ injured is spleen. Another question which has been asked, what is the most appropriate time to give antibiotics before surgery? This has been asked multiple times. And options are at the time of induction of anesthesia, 30 minutes to 1 hour before surgery, 4 hours before surgery, after skin incision. The correct answer here is 30 minutes to 1 hour before surgery. Earlier, the answer was induction of anesthesia, but the latest guidelines say that 30 minutes to 1 hour before surgery is when the prophylactic antibiotic should be given. So please remember these important points. Prevention of wound infection is commonly asked, and it usually you have one question from this topic. So you need to know that prophylactic antibiotics, the best time is 30 minutes to 1 hour before surgery. The repeat dose in case of prolonged surgery can be given after 4 hours. This has not been asked in the FMG exam as yet, but can be asked in the future. The other methods to reduce wound infections, the best method you know is hand hygiene, is washing of hands. And another question which has been asked in your exam, when you have to remove hair from an operative site, please remember no shaving. Shaving increases the wound infection rate. These days we do clipping of hair using a hair clipper. So no shaving, clipping of hair should be done using a hair clipper. Another common question in your exam is regarding ranula. So they've asked the best treatment for a ranula. Options given were incision and drainage, aspiration of the swelling, excision of the submandibular gland, and excision of the swelling plus the sublingual gland. So the correct answer here is excision of the sublingual gland and the swelling. So ranula, you know, it is a mucus extravasation cyst. Please remember extravasation involving the sublingual salivary gland. The image has also been asked in the exam, so you should remember the image. You can see that it presents as a cystic swelling in the floor of the mouth. And this cystic swelling is brilliantly transilluminant. They've also asked in your exam what are the other brilliantly transilluminant swellings you know of. So the other brilliantly transilluminant swellings can be a lymphangioma or a cystic hygroma, right? You can also have epididymal cysts, and sometimes hydrocele can also be brilliantly transilluminant. Hydroceles are transilluminant, but brilliantly transilluminant are usually lymphangioma or cystic hygroma, ranula, and epididymal cysts. The management of a ranula is excision of the sublingual salivary gland and the swelling. Another treatment option for ranula, which has also been asked in the exam, is marsupialization. So this is another treatment option for ranulas. Marsupialization can also be done. Please remember, no incision and drainage for ranula, otherwise there is a high recurrence rate. This question has also been asked previously, the most common type of renal stone. So the most common type of renal stone is calcium oxalate stone. Just briefly about renal stones. Calcium oxalate is the most common type of renal stone, and you know it is formed in acidic urine. It is radio opaque. You know that 90% renal stones are radio opaque, and calcium oxalate stones will have spiculated margins. It has sharp margins, which is why it presents early. Another stone is struvite or staghorn stone. It is also known as triple phosphate stone. This has also been asked, and the question which has been asked, that this triple phosphate or struvite or staghorn stone is seen in infected or alkaline urine, and the organism responsible is Proteus. This has been asked in your exam. Other types of stones, cystine stones are also radio opaque, and the question which has been asked, they are the hardest stones and you cannot break them by ESWL. The full form of ESWL has also been asked in your exam. It is a method to deal with renal stones. It is known as extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy. So extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy is ESWL. That is ESWL. You should know the full form. Extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy. Uric acid stones are the most common radiolucent stones, and they can be seen in gout and tumor-lysis syndrome. Another question is, which is the investigation of choice to diagnose renal stones? Options are CECT, X-ray KUB, NCCT, that is non-contrast CT, and ultrasound. So what do you think is the correct answer? The correct answer is non-contrast CT scan, NCCT. And you should know 3 areas where NCCT is the investigation of choice. So non-contrast CT scan is the investigation of choice for renal stones, salivary gland stones, and head trauma. Renal stones and head trauma both have been asked in the exam, the investigation of choice. Please remember, it is not contrast enhanced CT scan, it is non-contrast CT scan, NCCT. The next question which you should know about, hydrocele in a child is best managed by. So congenital hydrocele, the treatment is herniotomy. Please remember this. The treatment for congenital hydrocele is herniotomy. This has been asked multiple times. So the most common type of hydrocele is known as vaginal hydrocele, right? And primary vaginal hydrocele is the most common type, primary vaginal. And the treatment for primary vaginal hydrocele, there are 2 procedures. You can either do Lord's plication, or you can do eversion of sac or Jaboulet's procedure. So this is for vaginal hydrocele, and I've told you normal vaginal hydrocele, primary vaginal hydrocele is transilluminant. Congenital hydrocele, on the other hand, congenital hydrocele is when the sac is going to communicate with the peritoneal cavity. So this is congenital hydrocele. In this, you have a patent processus vaginalis. That means it is communicating with the peritoneal cavity, and there is invariably a hernial sac present as well. So in these patients, we are going to carry out, in these patients, we will carry out a herniatomy as treatment. This has been asked multiple times in the exam. Please remember this. Herniatomy is the treatment in these patients. The next question is that you have a 25-year-old lady who is complaining of discharge from the breast, but it is from a single duct and it is bloody discharge. So they've asked the most appropriate treatment. Options are radical excision, microdocectomy, mastectomy, or a biopsy to rule out cancer. Right? So which condition are we talking about? You know, the most common cause of bloody nipple discharge from a single duct is a duct papilloma. That is the most common cause of bloody nipple discharge from a single duct. So the treatment when you have a single duct involvement is microdocectomy. Microdocectomy, you know, is removal of a single duct and the lump. That is microdocectomy. So greenish nipple discharge can be from multiple ducts. It is seen in duct ectasia. And because multiple ducts are involved, we will carry out Hadfield's procedure or cone excision of all the ducts. Right? So when multiple ducts are involved, that is usually in duct ectasia, all the ducts are removed. That is known as Hadfield's procedure. But if a single duct is involved, single duct bloody nipple discharge, you will get in duct papilloma. That is the most common cause. And because 10% duct papillomas can be associated with DCIS, you know what DCIS is? DCIS is ductal carcinoma in situ, right? Non-invasive cancer. So in this case, we will do a microdocectomy. That means removal of a single duct and the lump. Okay. So that is what we carry out. To diagnose a ductal papilloma, we do an ultrasound. If an ultrasound is inconclusive, we will do an MRI. This was a question in last year's exam. The most common vein used for central vein catheterization. The answer here is internal jugular vein. Very important question, can be asked again. You know, central venous lines. The most common vein is internal jugular vein. Subclavian vein is commonly used when you have to give TPN for a long duration. TPN, you know, is total parenteral nutrition. When you are giving nutrition through the IV line, you can use the subclavian vein commonly. There is increased risk of pneumothorax when you are inserting a subclavian line, right? And great saphenous vein is not used for central venous catheterization, but it is used for venous cut down. Venous cut down or venesection is done in trauma patients. If you are unable to insert an IV line, there you can do a venous cut down, and the great saphenous vein is the most common vein used there. So invariably there is one question from sutures in your exam, and the question here is which one of the following is not an absorbable suture, right? Options are polyglactin, polypropylene, polydioxone, and catgut. So the answer here is polypropylene. Polypropylene, you know, is proline, and proline is a non-absorbable suture. The others are all absorbable sutures. Polyglactin, you know, is known as Vicryl, and this Vicryl, it dissolves in 60 to 90 days. This has also been asked in your exam. Polydioxone is PDS. It is also an absorbable suture, but this has double the absorption time as Vicryl, 180 days. And catgut and chromic catgut are also absorbable sutures. Another question which has been asked, catgut is derived from not the gut of cat, but it is derived from sheep gut, right? So not cat gut, it is actually from sheep gut. So sutures can be absorbable or non-absorbable. Absorbable sutures can be further divided into natural and synthetic. I've just told you catgut is derived from sheep gut from the submucosa. Synthetic absorbable sutures are monocryl, best for subcuticular suturing. Vicryl, I just told you, is polyglactin, dissolves in 60 to 90 days. This has also been asked. Non-absorbable sutures can also be natural and synthetic. Natural non-absorbable sutures, all of you are familiar with silk. Synthetic non-absorbable sutures, proline. Proline is polypropylene, very important. Proline, you should know the uses. It is used as the hernia mesh. The hernia mesh is made out of proline sutures. Also, it is used for vascular repair. To repair vessels, you use proline sutures. And it is used to close the rectus sheath. This has also been asked in the exam. Right, so these are the uses of proline sutures. Ethylon or nylon is also a non-absorbable suture used for skin suturing. Now, invariably, you have one or two instruments, the images are given and they ask you to identify them. This was asked last year, they had asked you to identify this instrument. And if you've ever been to the theater, you can easily identify this as a curved artery forceps. So you can see it is curved, right? So you can have curved or straight artery forceps. This one is curved, and you can see that there are these serrations which are present there. So serrations are present. You can either have a curved artery or a straight artery forceps. The name suggests that you can hold a bleeding vessel with this, right? The other options, this one was an Allis tissue forceps. This has also been asked. How do you identify Allis tissue forceps? You will see these teeth at the tip, right? And because there are teeth there, it can cause trauma. So you will not use it in delicate structures. You will use it you will use it to hold tough structures like the sheath or the fascia. You will not hold delicate structures with Allis forceps. This one is a Babcock forceps. You can see the difference from Allis. There are no teeth here. There is some space between the two handles. So you can hold a tubular structure using Babcock forceps, right? Like the appendix or the fallopian tube can be held using a Babcock forceps. This is a sponge holder. So see the difference between Babcocks. There is some space. It is slightly curved. This is a sponge holder, and you hold a sponge using a sponge holder, and then you clean the area. So you must have seen the surgeon before starting any case. They clean the area. They hold the sponge using this sponge holder. So all these instruments have been asked. You should remember these. Another question which has been asked frequently in your exam, what is the utility of the instrument shown in the image? So this instrument you have to identify. The utility options are to make an incision. No, we use a blade to make an incision, right? Split thickness skin grafting is the correct answer here. It is used for split thickness skin grafting, and this instrument is known as a Humbee's knife. Asked many times in the exam, right? You know the difference between a graft and a flap. A graft is one which does not have its own blood supply. Flap has its own blood supply, right? So you know that skin grafts can be of two types. You can either have split thickness skin grafts or full thickness skin grafts. Split thickness skin graft, as the name suggests, it is thin. It is also known as Thiersch graft. Full thickness is thick. It is known as Wolff's graft. Split thickness skin graft has epidermis and part of dermis, very slight area of dermis can also be there. And the most common donor site is the thigh for a split thickness skin graft. Full thickness skin graft has epidermis and dermis. And please remember, we can use the post-auricular skin, but we never use the axilla for full thickness skin grafting. And to raise a split thickness skin graft, we use a Humbee's knife. So the last question which I want to discuss in this module is regarding GCS. It is very, very important. Invariably, there is one question from Glasgow Coma score in your exam. So the question here is that a 25-year-old male meets with a road traffic accident and the ambulance brings the patient to the emergency room. His vitals are stable and he opens his eyes to painful stimulus. He is abusing the doctors and his limbs go into abnormal flexion on painful stimulus. So you need to memorize the GCS score. You know it has 3 components: eye-opening, verbal response and motor response. And if you add them up here, the score turns out to be 8. How? So you can see that eye-opening is to painful stimulus, that is E2, right? He is abusing the doctors or abusing the nurses means inappropriate words. So common in head injury patients, common in patients who are under the influence of alcohol. So V3, inappropriate words. And abnormal flexion, that is another 3. This is abnormal flexion or decorticate rigidity. So the score here is 8. You know the minimum GCS score is 3 and the maximum GCS score is 15. So please remember the GCS score. So by discussing these 15 questions, I've told you a lot of points other than the questions itself. So please make a note of these points for your upcoming FMG exam. I will be uploading the next set of questions next week. Till then, please keep studying. Please solve MCQs at this time. Make sure you're doing more than 50 to 60 MCQs every day. And please remember, even if you have a month, you can still achieve your target. Set your target and keep trying until you reach it, right? You know the target for you is 150 is your passing score. But if I were you, I will keep the target as around 165 to 170 so that I can easily hit this target and easily pass the exam, right? You don't want to get stuck in the 140s. It is the worst feeling to have. So keep studying hard, keep preparing, keep solving MCQs. If you like this video, please do press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be uploading the next video soon. Thank you very much.